Cancel me leave. Say goodbye to your promotion. Error in the title. It should read, Cancel my leave. Say goodbye to your promotion. I was previously employed at an agency that provided shared accommodations for individuals with disabilities. It was a role in which I assisted 4 to 6 residents, all of whom shared the living space. The schedule involved shift work, with 2 clients assigned per staff member during the day and 1 staff member on overnight duty. The rosters operated on a 4-week rotating basis. I was hired as a 0.75 employee, which meant I worked 75% of what is classified as full-time, amounting to 57 hours every 2 weeks. Working shifts was not enjoyable, but the compensation was satisfactory. I worked in a facility that I will refer to as Sunup. This location housed 4 residents and employed 7 staff members. Each home assigned a house supervisor, who reported to a cluster manager overseeing 6 homes, while the cluster managers reported to the chief executive officer. According to company policy, leave requests operated on a first-come, first-served basis, meaning it was necessary to submit leave requests early to ensure approval. I was reassigned to Sunup from a house with 6 clients due to my qualifications and circumstances I cannot legally disclose. During my first year, I became familiar with the staff, clients, and house supervisor. There was a notable clique among 4 staff members. Each school holiday, 3 would submit leave requests, while 1 would call in sick with a medical certificate covering the same duration. They frequently rotated who would call in sick to disguise their actions, as they were friends outside of work and would socialize together. After a year, the house supervisor became ill. 1 member of the clique, Karen, was appointed as the acting supervisor, and the situation deteriorated. She attempted to reduce my hours while providing additional shifts to a friend. I reminded her that my contract stipulates I am to work 57 hours every fortnight, hence I should be compensated accordingly. Her friends received extra shifts, were allocated the best schedules, and were generally favored by Karen. In January, I submitted a request for leave during the March school holidays, which Karen denied, citing that others had already submitted requests for the same period, her clique members. I let this slide. In March, I checked the leave calendar for the June school holidays. Each house had a leave calendar accessible to management and staff to see who scheduled leave. It was completely empty. I submitted another leave request, only to have it rejected again. Karen informed me that I was too slow, insisting that a B and C members of her clique had already requested leave. The following day, the leave calendar reflected their submissions. In May, I checked the Christmas leave calendar, submitted my request, and, predictably, received the same disappointing outcome. This frustrated me, as I wanted to take my family on a vacation. I discussed the situation with the cluster manager, also part of the clique, who told me there was nothing I could do. Note that I had not taken any leave in 2 years. In January of the following year, while the clique was on holiday, we experienced a gastro outbreak across our facilities, leading to staff shortages. All available staff members, including the CEO, were covering shifts. I was scheduled to work a shift with the CEO. During this time, he remarked to me, "Oh, you have accrued a bit of leave. You should consider taking some." I responded, "I submitted 3 requests last year, all of which were denied as others had already requested those dates." The CEO replied, "Let's secure your leave right now." I said, "Sure, how about 4 weeks over Christmas?" I completed the leave form, and the CEO signed it. He then updated the leave calendar and placed my application in Karen's inbox. That night, I was on overnight duty, so I took my application, made a photocopy for myself, and placed it back beneath a pile of paperwork in her inbox, knowing she would not see it for several months. In March, when I checked the leave calendar, I saw that my Christmas leave had vanished, replaced by submissions from Karen, A, B, and C. I did not speak up since I possessed a copy of the leave form signed by the CEO. Fast forward to October, the original house supervisor passed away, and the cluster manager appointed the acting supervisor as the permanent supervisor with a mandatory 3-month probationary period. When December arrived, during the first week of my scheduled leave, Karen called me demanding, "Where are you?" I replied, "I'm on leave." Karen said, "I didn't approve any leave. Get to work immediately." When I arrived, Karen berated me, claiming she hadn't received an application form, She went on to state, "Even if you had submitted it, I would still have rejected it because you should know by now that we always take 2 weeks off in December and January." She issued me a write-up for insubordination. I completed the shift, and after Karen left, I emailed the CEO to inform him of the situation. He called a meeting with both Karen and me. The CEO asked, "What happened?" Karen interrupted, saying, "He took it upon himself to approve leave. I wrote him up for skipping work." I interjected, "Actually, I submitted my leave request in January while you were away." Karen responded, "No, you didn't." The CEO insisted, "Yes, he did. I approved it and added it to the leave calendar." Karen then stated, "Oh, we already had 4 staff booked on leave." The CEO demanded, "Show me the leave forms." Karen hesitated, replying, I destroyed them." At that moment, I handed Karen my copy of the signed leave form. The CEO said, "He is on leave. I'm going to Sunup to investigate this situation. You can head home now. I apologize for the inconvenience, and I will extend your leave by an additional week." I returned home and came back 4.5 weeks later to learn that Karen had lost her promotion and was on thin ice. The CEO discovered that Karen had been rejecting other colleagues' leave requests. She had shredded my request without considering the date and removed my leave from the calendar. The CEO informed Karen that her actions bordered on fraud. Additionally, the CEO relocated the clique to different houses. He revised the leave policy to stipulate that he needed to authorize leave requests alongside the house supervisor and cluster managers. He made sure that all staff had access to prime leave dates. Karen was terminated 2 weeks later for failing to meet audit requirements. Edit, spelling correction. Edit, to further clarify why the CEO engaged in grunt work. Funding bodies required that 1 staff member was needed for every 2 clients during the day. We were short-staffed overall, leading to significant juggling of personnel. All staff employed by the company who were not on leave were working in homes, including the CEO, cluster managers, and administrative staff. They were scheduled with qualified personnel who took charge. The CEO held social work qualifications and experience, but lacked hands-on support worker experience. The situation was extreme enough to risk losing funding. The reason the CEO extended my leave by a week was due to the incident occurring on a Monday, with the meeting taking place on either Wednesday or Thursday. I cannot recall exactly. Since I worked Monday and was called in for the meeting, I would not have received my 4 weeks. Story 2. Aita for refusing to give any of my inheritance to my mother and half-siblings. Am I the antagonist for, as mentioned earlier, informing both my mother and my brother, along with his family, that since my inheritance from my father is nearing its conclusion, I will not be providing any financial assistance to anyone besides my niece, who is not involved in this situation. She will receive whatever portion I choose to leave her through a trust or estate. I will summarize my story briefly, as detailing everything point by point would take an inordinate amount of time. My father was diagnosed with multiple cancers in 2020, around the time of the COVID-19 pandemic. My dad and I have always been incredibly close. I was doing quite well on my own, running a successful business, but as soon as I learned about his terminal illness, I abandoned everything. I left my business, ended my engagement, and committed myself to taking care of him full-time for the next 3 to 4 years in France. My father meant everything to me, and I was his only son. My brother is from a different marriage. I endured the heartbreaking experience of watching the strongest person I have ever known, a former military man, deteriorate until his final day. On the day he passed away, I re-established contact with my brother. I had not spoken to him in about 5 to 6 years because I had cut him out of my life. He and his family are the type of individuals who habitually take advantage of others, frequently borrowing money and failing to repay it. Before I made my current decisions, he owed me over $10,000 and often used my niece as a shield, asking me to consider her needs and how he couldn't afford rent, etc. This financial strain went on for about a year because I was extremely naive from 2018 to 2019 until I completely severed communication. However, after my father's death, my brother and I became somewhat close again, though he appeared to have changed. But I should have known better. After my father's passing, I returned to the States and stayed with my mother, preparing for a year-long legal battle against my malevolent grandmother. my dad's mother, who was excessively greedy and claimed there was no will. I had to navigate through an overwhelming array of legal processes that drained me emotionally over the past year. Since February 2024, I have had to deal with attorneys and notaries involved in the international inheritance process in France. I spent countless nights studying French law, as I grew up primarily in the United States and was unfamiliar with the significant differences in the French legal system. After a year of hard work, I finally prevailed because I knew I would. My dad left a will naming me as the sole heir, and there was never any objection to that. Now, everything is coming to a close with a substantial amount of money involved. However, throughout the year since my father's passing, I received no help from either my brother, his family, or my mother. Instead, I faced constant stress and was belittled by my mother, who claimed that without me, she would not be receiving anything, which is entirely untrue. According to French law, established by Napoleon, a parent can disinherit their children, and since I am my father's only child, he expressly stated in his will that I would be the sole heir and said nothing to my mother or anyone else about sharing that inheritance. Over the past week, tensions have escalated, especially when my brother's car broke down, rendering it useless. I flew out to assist him because I just received a portion of my life insurance payout. I offered to fix his car, and if it were beyond repair, I would help him buy a new one, registering it in my name and assisting him with monthly payments until my inheritance was finalized and I could pay it off completely. In the following 7 days, I worked tirelessly to contact the dealership and secure a new 2025 Mazda CX-30. However, I received a text from him 2 days ago questioning the legroom in the back seat and whether I was still committed to that car. I confirmed my commitment to the vehicle, explaining that I had already placed a deposit to hold it. He had ample opportunity to voice his concerns earlier, yet he is over a decade my senior and was fixated on the wrong issues, worrying about rear seat space instead of the car's safety, depreciation over the years, and maintenance costs. I urged him to mature and reiterated that I was committed to this car, as I was not only assisting him with half the payments, but would also pay it off in full once my inheritance came through. He then threw a fit, making comments about how my niece would suffer because of her limited space in the back seat, despite the fact that she is already 17 years old. His other options for transportation were virtually non-existent because he is broke, living paycheck to paycheck, and refuses to work while attempting to dictate what I should provide for him. I questioned his audacity to say such things after I went above and beyond to help him. As of 2 days ago, I reached out to him, but he has not responded. Regarding my mother, during the past year I stayed with her while finalizing everything. I observed her mental state deteriorating. She hasn't been mentally sound and has repeatedly insulted me and disparaged my father, claiming things about him that are utterly false. The only reason my father stayed in the marriage as long as he did was to avoid having me grow up in a broken home. In summary, after the incident with my brother and the numerous disrespectful comments from my mother over the year, especially since she seems to feel entitled to a share of the inheritance, I informed everyone this morning that I will not be giving anyone anything. I told my mother that my father instructed me before his passing to look after everyone and act responsibly with the money, which I intend to do. My brother will not receive any financial compensation since he is not my father's son. Additionally, concerning the car situation, I pointed out that I had done all the work, which was remarkable to me. I also reminded my mother that throughout my father's life, she merely belittled him, and this past year with her has felt like emotional abuse, listening to outrageous claims about my father that are beyond comprehension. She seems unable to allow him to rest in peace. What I have decided is that, since I sacrificed the majority of my youth, specifically 4 to 5 years of my 20s, to care for my father, looking after him tirelessly, and putting my business and relationships on hold while no one else cared, I will not be providing any financial assistance to my family. Even without my personal sacrifices, I would have still done the same for my father, who was my best friend for as long as I could remember. Instead, I will establish a trust or estate for my niece, whom my father loved unconditionally. This trust will remain undisclosed to her Until she turns 30, she's 18 now, and will be managed by an executor of my choice. As for my mother, she also will not receive financial compensation. Her housing, living expenses, and any potential medical costs will be covered through funds I set aside with an executor or trustee. Every financial decision will go through an approval process with an attorney appointed by me, who will have strict guidelines for dispensing funds. So, essentially, am I the antagonist for finally standing up for myself and refusing to provide any financial support to my family? Story 3. Is this even salvageable? Should I give in to an open marriage? This is a lengthy post, but I genuinely require advice and guidance. If nothing else, it is a rather foolish narrative. I am 30 years old, female, and my husband is 35 years old, male. We have been together for 16 years and married for 9 years. We were quite young when we first met, so it is easy to say that we have both made significant mistakes in our relationship. However, his mistakes far exceed mine. Regardless, we carry a great deal of emotional baggage. From the very moment we started living together, which was 4 years into our relationship, he has consistently communicated with other women. I never witnessed any clear evidence of physical infidelity, but to me, texting and messaging count as cheating. His defense has always been that he never acted on any of it, they were merely messages. I cannot explain why, but I continuously forgave him even though, technically, he never expressed true remorse, insisting it was not a major issue. He would often deflect the blame onto me for not being supportive, or would frequently remind me of my past mistakes. To provide some backstory, during our initial 4 years together, I requested a break because I had doubts about him. He was very controlling, and I wanted to experience life as an 18-year-old. Therefore, we took a break lasting 6 to 8 months, during which time I engaged with multiple people, though I was never sexual with anyone. He was deeply hurt by this and begged me to return. Eventually, I relented, and everything progressed quickly. We moved in together, already having had our first daughter, who was nearly 3 at that time. Shortly after we began cohabitating, I snooped through his phone and discovered messages from other women, none of whom were local but all from his hometown. He would frequently justify it by saying, "It's not like I am going to act on it since they don't even live here." He was never particularly romantic. He offered compliments while we were dating, like the usual courtship gestures, but all of that stopped once we moved in together. Naturally, it was painful to see him express affection towards other women that I would have cherished hearing from him. Beyond this, he has always been friendly, especially with women. He makes friends with them easily and enjoys forging connections. As a jealous woman, this behavior particularly bothered me, especially in light of how he treated me compared to them. Although I never truly witnessed him being inappropriate with his female friends, there were definitely moments that raised questions. As the years passed, the situation exacerbated. He started hiring women to assist him at work. He works in construction for cleanup or touch-ups. I was so naive, I trusted him despite knowing his past behavior. One night, I found a video of him receiving a hand job and kissing a female coworker, which understandably drove me into a rage, prompting me to kick him out. Yet again, I found it in my heart to forgive him, despite his attempts to blame me. During this tumultuous time, I endured 3 miscarriages, and my lack of desire for intimacy only made matters worse. Fast forward a couple of years, I discovered messages on his phone with women in our town. I started feeling desperate for attention and validation, wondering if I was unattractive or not desirable enough. I had previously ignored friend requests from strangers, but I finally accepted all of them. I ended up exchanging messages with another man, which he found out about. Even though he had done so much more, he viewed my actions as a betrayal. It took time, but eventually he forgave me. A few years later, in 2024, he began hiring female employees again. My job kept me incredibly busy. I was receiving promotion after promotion, so I didn't think much of it. Again, I was foolish. After a couple of months, I decided to snoop on his phone and once again found inappropriate messages. They included requests for outings, offers to make him lunch, and him inviting them for ice cream, though there was nothing definitive indicating physical cheating. Naturally, I took matters into my own hands, installing recording devices in his car and a tracking device on him. For some reason, I feel trapped because he hasn't physically cheated on me, leading me to believe I am merely waiting for that to happen so I can justify leaving him and moving on. I overheard numerous inappropriate conversations where he asked a woman for sexual favors. Although I never heard evidence of anything happening, their jokes were suggestive. One day, I heard him ridicule how our relationship began, referring to me as initially just a hookup. That shattered my heart. I felt humiliated when, right after that, he exited his car and began mocking me with her. I eventually confronted him about everything I had learned. During this period of spying, I had been providing him with exceptional intimacy, hoping it would alter his behavior, but it didn't. Once again, I found myself forgiving him. I felt uncertain since I had no clear proof of any physical infidelity. After our fierce arguments surrounding that incident, our sex life improved significantly. I cannot explain why, but I was enjoying myself more than usual. He started engaging in sexual conversations with me, something we hadn't done in quite some time. He began opening up about his preferences and dislikes, so I did the same. I confess that even though it devastated me to hear him speak sexually to another woman, it somehow turned me on. Beneath all that pain, I felt arousal, which I know seems strange. This led to a discussion about the possibility of an open marriage or a threesome. I conveyed that I would be comfortable with him talking to or even being intimate with another woman, but insisted on complete transparency. I didn't want any secrets, and I mentioned that I would like to be involved or at least present. This arrangement intrigued me. Since that conversation, our relationship has shifted. We agreed to share all of our secrets to start fresh. Importantly, whatever we disclosed could not be held against us. He eventually confessed to cheating on me physically shortly after learning about my messaging the other man. Our relationship has been thriving since then. He is attentive and caring, and our intimacy has been extraordinary. We cannot go a day without it. It's been about 3 months, but I find myself feeling jealousy and insecurity whenever he texts or messages another woman, even though I gave him permission. He has not acted on anything, and we always discussed that any experiences we pursue would involve both of us. However, tomorrow he has a date to meet another woman. This particular woman is not interested in engaging with another female. My husband has been completely honest and has shared all conversations with me, yet it still pains me. I do not know how to stop overthinking these matters. I understand that he is excited, he is a man, and he is attempting to remain casual. However, I thought he wouldn't go through with this since we had decided we wanted to navigate this journey together. I feel lost, unsure of what I want or why I continue to stay here, to be honest. I do love him, but it feels like he might never change. This is who he is, very sexual and drawn to engaging with women. I can either accept that or leave him. Yet, I struggle to leave because I love him. Perhaps that is why I constantly sought proof that he had engaged in actual sex with another woman. However, I never received such evidence, and now, while I find it stimulating, I realize I have agreed to something that hurts me, hoping it will somehow lessen my pain. Story 4. It is a really bad idea to make a government employee angry. This account describes a situation involving 2 government employees, and it is important to remember that angering a government worker can lead to significant trouble. Apologies for the lengthy narrative. The context is that I was employed at a local county government's permitting department, which managed drainage and floodplain enforcement. I received a complaint from a homeowner, a nice individual who resided next to a property within an incorporated village, inhabited by an unpleasant neighbor. The nice homeowner lived in an unincorporated area of the county, which is why he contacted me, representing the county. I visited the site to investigate and uncovered some troubling information. The permitting agent for the village had permitted the resident of the incorporated area to fill his lot, negatively affecting drainage, which resulted in the unincorporated property flooding with any significant rainfall. The nice homeowner mentioned some existing tension with his unpleasant neighbor, partly due to the fact that he and his partner were a same-sex couple. This raised a red flag for me. However, in an effort to remain impartial, I documented the information and took photographs for the case file, stating that I would reach out to the village to find a solution. I drafted a letter and subsequently called the village inspector, who was uncooperative, expressing that the village could act as they wished and that there was nothing I could do to stop the neighbor from continuing his actions since they had been sanctioned by the village. There was also an offensive remark about individuals like the gay couple making complaints merely to stir up trouble. I was now formally involved, and it became my responsibility to ensure that all activities on the incorporated lot were fully compliant with regulations. At this point, it was clear that I had to take a stand against bullying, which is particularly frustrating for me. I returned to speak with the nice homeowner to inform him about my actions and assure him that I would not allow the situation to go unchecked. I also began examining the elevations of both lots and assessing the fill placed on the incorporated property. The unpleasant neighbor confronted me, aggressively questioning my presence and ongoing investigation. He incorrectly asserted that I lacked jurisdiction over his property and threatened to contact law enforcement. I calmly listened, then activated my two-way radio to request that both village and county police units respond to the scene. I made it clear that, as there was a regulatory floodplain on his property, I indeed had jurisdiction and would exercise my right to assess how his fill activities impacted the floodplain. Both police units arrived, and I briefed them on the situation. They expressed their frustration at having to intervene and informed the unpleasant neighbor that I was operating within my legal authority to carry out the investigation. Shortly after, while I was measuring the area, the village inspector showed up and began chastising me for supposedly harassing the village resident, threatening to contact my supervisor and file a complaint. I encouraged him to proceed, reminding him to specify which aspects of the regulations I was allegedly infringing upon. While I was using marking paint to delineate the floodplain's extent for documentation purposes, he ended up getting paint on his shoe while attempting to stop me. This understandably heightened both his anger and that of the homeowner due to the bright orange markings on his lawn. I pointed out that I had marked the neighboring lots in the same manner, but they continued to voice their objections. The marking chalk I used, however, was easily removable. Interestingly, I discovered two significant violations on the unpleasant neighbor's property. One, fill was present within the floodplain, and two, a garden shed had been constructed on this fill and partially encroached upon the floodplain. Both of these actions are serious infractions and violate federal law. As a result, my course of action included two steps. 1. Require the homeowner in the incorporated area to remove the fill and shed from the floodplain, and 2. Permit the nice homeowner to place fill on his property outside the floodplain to counterbalance the fill left on the unpleasant neighbor's lot. I also advised the nice homeowner to consider installing a field tile on his side to help drain any water that would accumulate between the two lots when it rained. Predictably, the unpleasant neighbor and the village inspector became quite agitated when I issued a letter outlining the violations that needed to be rectified: removal of fill and shed, or the application for a revision of the floodplain with the Army Corps of Engineers, which is no easy task. This led to a meeting at the county office that included the unpleasant neighbor, the village inspector, my supervisor, and myself. The discussion quickly escalated, with the village inspector vocally complaining about abuse of power. The department head entered the meeting and informed both parties that they were incorrect and should leave gracefully and comply, or they would face penalties, fines. The most satisfying aspect was that the unpleasant neighbor had to apply for a permit, and guess who was responsible for reviewing and approving it? That's right, me. I was adhering to legal regulations, but it is important to understand that government workers are often underpaid and overwhelmed. Interestingly, the permit for the nice homeowner was approved almost immediately, while the unpleasant neighbor's application underwent intensive scrutiny to ensure accuracy. One could argue that I was misusing my authority, but I assure you that the timeline for reviews was well within acceptable limits. Additionally, how could I be held accountable for their repeated misfiling 3 times before finally submitting it correctly? Generally, if individuals acted civilly and visited the office, we would help them navigate the process effectively to ensure a successful permit submission on the first attempt. However, the unpleasant neighbor chose to handle everything independently, resulting in his having to submit 3 times. Had he approached the office, I would have provided him with the same assistance as others, but he opted for the more challenging route, leaving me no choice but to enforce strict compliance for his submission. In conclusion, the matter was eventually resolved, but it required significantly more effort than it should have. The lesson here is clear. Do not behave like an entitled, homophobic individual.